So we have a crew of our partners here working on the consent report that are joining us here. So great, we'll have a robust conversation. Amanda, is there anyone else that we're waiting for?
I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, there's 10 of us here.
Oh, that's a quorum. For sure. Greetings, everyone. Thanks for making time. I'm Daniel. No, actually, I'm SOC Institute. I got to change my name here. I don't know why it keeps doing that. There you go. Now that's who I am. So I really appreciate your taking some time to talk to us a little bit about Unitas, and we just want to. We have some questions we sent out to you. Obviously, you saw those. We've been talking with a variety of different folks, and so really look forward to kind of having a chance to kind of dig into a couple of pieces, particular on consent. Oh, Chris, welcome. So one of the things, so I can maybe do some quick intros. We don't have an hour, so I think just sort of name and role would be great. And I can provide a little bit of an overview. I think we try to give it to you just to sort of set the ground, and then kind of go into some of the questions, if that's okay with you guys. And if you have other concerns or questions or want further explanation, we're happy and delighted to do that. So anyway, I'm Daniel. I'm one of the co-founders of Stewards of Change, and been involved with data sharing for a while. Jennifer, I just name folks, and then you can name the next person. So Jennifer.
Sure. So I'm Jennifer Bernstein. I'm an attorney and deputy director of the Network for Public Health Law, and I've been assisting on this project. Oh, sorry. Name the next person. I will call Chris. Yeah.
I'm Chris Alibrandi. I'm also attorney. Jennifer and I work together at the Network for Public Health. I used to be a privacy officer and privacy legal counsel. And I know a fair amount about Unitas because I recently moved from New Hampshire, was involved in the district project and the evaluation of the various programs that the state might have used. Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Kowalski, and I'm not an attorney. And I currently work for FEI Systems, spent over 25 years in state government and was involved in many different initiatives and efforts in sharing information. Who do I want to pick here? How about Carlos?
Okay, Carlos Uriarte. I'm Vice President and Regulatory Counsel here at Unitas. Jake.
Sure. My name is Jake Thompson. I lead our interoperability product organization at Unitas. Nice to meet you all. A couple of folks I've met in Gravity or HIMSS S2H Task Force, so it's nice to chat again. Cody?
Yeah, I'm Cody Johansson. I'm our interoperability manager here for Unitas, so oversee all of the connections in and out of our system. So Amanda?
Hi, Amanda with Stewards of Change as a consultant and mostly work on the Project Unify team and helping with this consent work. Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Yan with Alexandria Consulting. I also work on interoperability for BitFocus. How about Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Bishop, CEO of Open City Labs. I think I've seen Cody on a 360X call or two. So I'm co-authoring the consent scan and look forward to learning from you guys. Thanks. Is there anybody else who hasn't been called yet?
Young.
I think that's it.
Nope, I think Young is.
That's right, Daniel.
I know.
All right.
Know my customers.
Hello, everyone. This is John Kim. I am with Gainwell Technologies. And in terms of my work, I am a health and human services analytics consultant. Back to you.
Thanks very much. As we get started here, just to sort of level the playing field, you guys probably know, I know Adam sent some stuff. Would it be helpful to give like a 3-minute overview of what we're doing? Okay, great. So, so over the years, we've been involved with information sharing across programs and silos and domains, health, social services, education, justice, and have been really bringing people together for many years to try to figure out how to do that better, sort of reduce the friction in that, both at the county, at the state and federal levels, and built out a national collaborative with support from Kresge Foundation and try to bring people together around a lot of these really kind of complex, vexing topics that the industry has been dealing with for many, many, many years. And about 2 years ago, we started something called Project Unify, which was an attempt to sort of create a roadmap so everybody didn't have to start from blank page all the time, to try to sort of illustrate and demonstrate some of the best practices. Have been involved at about the same time with some of the integrated care for kids sites, given their particular interest and motivation to actually connect the dots, so to speak, because of their cooperative agreement with the office, with CMMI. Last year, we spent a good part of the year convening people from across the country to look at what would be potential structural changes that could affect the safety net system on a large scale across the country, given the onslaught of COVID and the efforts that were on, what we were beginning to see what was going to happen, and the obvious outcome of so many people being hurt by that, and the need for our services and systems to be more responsive. Anyways, through this sort of collaborative kind of sausage making iterative process over about 150 people over about 6 months, several things popped up. And one of the things that we really sort of focused in on was this idea of consent, and the idea that if that issue, or if the challenge of securing consent across multiple domains could be turned into some kind of utility, or could be created in a way that communities across the country could actually adopt it and use it and apply it, could have a dramatic effect on interoperability. And I think the attorneys, both on this call and everyone else we've spoken with, have agreed that if we can figure that out, if we can figure out consent, and I'm sure that's part of your experience as well at Unitas, is that a lot of the barriers, many of the challenges sort of get easier to address if we've got the client, patient, customer, person, guardian's consent. And so since January, we've been really concentrating on trying to figure out what that would look like. And recently got a small grant from the Robert Johnson Foundation to kind of do a scan, because we didn't see anywhere out there any kind of documentation that said, hey, here's the world of consent. There's referrals organizations like you guys and others. There's HIEs, there are EHRs, there's a lot of the ONC accelerator sites that are going on, stuff that they've done in the past. But there was no sort of compendium. And we felt like that was a necessary first step just to get a lay of the land, to see who was being successful, what some of the promising practices were, and could there be this sort of ambitious effort to kind of level the playing field to advance this data sharing work. So that's what we have been really focused on the last couple of months, is to try to get our arms around this, given it's been pretty opaque out there. You know one thing, you don't really have a sense of the overall status of things. And we've discovered over the last number of months through interviews and research and talking to people and convenings and presentations, there is actually quite a bit of work going on around the country. And so what we're trying to do is sort of wrestle that into a manageable size scan that we can use as sort of a V1.0, right? Here's what we know right now. And so that as systems go forward, and as the Office National Coordinator sort of picks up this theme, which they're very interested in, and many of the federal agencies, as well as state agencies, we can provide a little guidance around what might be working. And of course, Unitas and other sort of community referral platforms, refer to it, have done a lot of work in that area and have been very successful at actually moving the proverbial puck down across the ice there. So we've talked with a few, and we just really want to have a conversation with you guys. I think we have a pretty good sense of what kind of what the referral network does. And so what we would love to be able to do is kind of focus in on the consent pieces, on how you manage and handle those, how they integrate, and what they, what are the benefits and opportunities, but what are some of the challenges around that you can, see from obviously from, from the industry perspective and as much as you're willing to share from, your own organizational perspective. So let me throw it back. I'm not sure, Jake or Cody or Carlos, if you want to sort of provide some opening remarks or thoughts or questions, and then we can just kind of dive into some of the questions and go forward. And I'd open it up to our team as well, if you want to add anything that I might have missed here. So.
Can I maybe just ask one quick scene setting question? I'm sorry if this was in the material, I just didn't see it. It was just kind of like what are the rules of engagement?
Yeah. So we, when you say the rules of engagement here, so this will be a public document. It'll be, we'll be publishing it under the Stewards of Change, and we believe our RWJF will also push it out or at least reference it. We've talked about it a lot. We obviously don't want to give away any trade secrets. If we've learned any, then I'm not sure we have, that are not in the public domain right now. We will sort of name people we've spoken with. We'll provide you an opportunity to kind of see what we've written. And maybe I'll say one more thing here in terms of the structure of this. So we've got obviously preamble setting the problem, some of the principles and challenges that we're facing. Chris and Jennifer have done sort of a legal sort of review of it. There's a technology review of it. And then there's these promising practices. And we're kind of dividing them into 4 groups, right? So there's a community service referral platforms, CIE kind of things, HIEs, electronic health records, and then sort of what we're generally referring to sort of as government sponsored or public sector sponsored, like the LEAP grant and other stuff that may be coming out of ONC and other places. So those are the 4 categories that we'll be talking about. So we want to provide sort of an overview of what's happening within those areas, and then we'll reference under those the various people we've spoken with and provide a little more opportunities to kind of go into the what's relevant to the consent piece here that you guys bring to the table. Does that answer your question, Carlos?
I think so. I mean, just to be clear, like, is your expectation you'd quote, individuals, or more like you would explain like what Unitas' approach to consent would be?
Hopefully not quoting individuals per se, but trying to present your perspective on that, from your written materials. And we're happy to have you sort of provide that, or we'll edit that, write it. We are recording this so that Adam and we can go back and kind of learn from it. We're not trying to promote any particular product or service, but there's some interesting things going on out there. What can we build on? And we'll identify who we've spoken with or which organizations we've spoken with, if that's helpful. Okay.
Daniel,
appreciate it. Sorry.
Daniel, the only thing I would add to that is just, I mean, in a nutshell, it really is, we're just trying to, how did you crack the nut of consent? Yeah. I mean, you had to put it in motion. So how did you grapple with the technology issues, the patient matching, the, consent? How does it get revoked in your system? Like, how did you approach all of that and make it work for you? Because we're interested in the learnings to make them to broaden them, I guess you could say.
And just a point on clarification on the 4 categories you mentioned, EHRs, CIEs, HIEs, and then platforms like Unitas. Those are all relatively newer concepts or healthcare concepts. Do you plan to also include other core operational systems in the other domains of housing, schools, etc.? I mean, there's a lot more than just EHRs out there, and that's a core component to understanding this nut we have to crack, so to speak. Is that going to be a 5th category?
I would say it's part of those categories. So for instance, the CIE in the Bronx, which is an integrated care for kids site, is trying to bring in information, not only healthcare, behavioral health and HIV information, but also educational information, probation information. So it depends. We're trying to think about a way to present it without having too many different categories. And clearly, and you hit the nail on the head there, Jake, which is there's a ton of work going on in the healthcare side of stuff, advanced directives and health and EHRs. We want to recognize that, but we're not going to add a lot to that conversation so much, I don't think. I think our real interest is on social, education, probation, housing, those things, and those categories which may not even have consent requirements, but the tradition or the belief is we want to get their consent, even though there may not necessarily be a statute for that, right? So yes, so absolutely that is an area that we want to call out. We have, frankly, aside from the work that you guys have been doing, there's not a lot of examples of sort of replicable consent models outside of that, right? That we can take and drag over. There's consent to share from SAMHSA. That is, a model. There's the, CDS model in San Diego, the LEAP model, which doesn't really touch the social services, but it's kind of poised to be able to do that in some instances. So that's kind of what I would say on that. Well, we can kind of come around to that, and maybe there's a better way to call that out specifically. So, part of it is having a whole bunch of information to present it in a way that people who don't, the tendency is to either go too technical, legal technical, or technology technical, and then we lose the audience. So we're trying to, make it available to policy policy designers and people who are thinking about it with enough technical support, but not too much sort of the three bears kind of thing here. And I'm sure we'll get it, hopefully we'll get it close to right in most cases. And so we might have another category that explicitly calls out, the social, the other side of the other part of the HHS, right? To the human services side of the equation there. So.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Cool. Well, you have a pretty diverse panel here in terms of expertise. Cody comes from the HIE world. Carlos is our regulatory expert. I'm just the nerd that talks about technology and listens to these guys. So happy to dive into the questions, or if there's some information that would be helpful for us to start as a general overview of Unitas, we'd be happy to do that.
Can you take just a few minutes and give us a sense of it? I think people probably have a good sense of it, but if you want to just sort of provide us the elevator speech in terms of kind of where you're at, and then we can dive in, as Chris said, we sort of look more closely at the data sharing and the consent pieces of that.
Yeah, sure. So quick sort of elevator pitch on Unitas for all folks that aren't familiar. I apologize to those who do know. We actually started as a company in 2013. We were founded two veterans. So the DNA of Unitas is actually in the veteran space, not healthcare at all, which I think is actually part of what makes us successful in sort of thinking about how health and social care connect. We started off trying to solve a simple problem of fragmented services for the veteran population and how you could get that individual connected with the many co-occurring needs that they have and the services that could meet those needs, oftentimes working very independently. So Unitas sort of negative 1.0 is what the industry now calls a resource directory. And I think sometimes it's confused with a referral platform and other things, but it's sort of a phone book, right, of all the services out there on a website, what their eligibility requirements are, et cetera. And that actually failed pretty fast. And we pivoted the model very early on, which I think will matter a lot in this conversation, away from providing the individual, here's a directory of stuff you can get access to and you navigate it, to a system of coordinated care between all those providers of the services around a single record of that individual and a coordinated care team of closed loop, what we now call closed loop referrals, but essentially the ability to refer somebody from one organization to the next and close the loop, provide structured data on what actually happened on that service down to a level of granularity around, was this food box provided or not provided, and allowing all those organizations to operate as one care team. So as the industry started to invest in social determinants of health, we were really at the time serving veterans, and then started to graduate to what we now call community networks. So different municipalities, PPS system in New York, various sort of smaller community groups, multi-county, a couple organizations working together. And then about 2018, 2019, we really graduated to statewide, and then now really one national network of coordinated services. So we're the statewide service provider for North Carolina, and our NC Care 360 network, as well was our first enterprise-wide with Kaiser Permanente and all the geographies they operate in, and really have built essentially a national platform that allows organizations to coordinate with each other, still around that single social care record of that individual. And so that's, a big part of our starting point, I think, is a big part of our now where we're going with interoperability and thinking through some of these complex issues of how you extend that reach of that platform further. So early on, we built a uniform. Oops, sorry, you're hearing my consultant. Apologies, part of the pandemic life. The mail comes. In any case, I'm going to try to muscle through. All right. So we essentially built a model that has a permissioning engine that allows individuals that are cooperating in that network, ranging from a small faith-based organization to a very large health provider like Duke University Health or Kaiser Permanente, where there's thousands of users, to cooperate around that same record, but only see what information is their permission to see within the scope of the practice, as well as a uniform consent within our platform consent module. So it allows the individual to consent to have their information shared within the network. They're able to opt out of that at any time. We're able to gather it in multiple different modalities, whether that's texting somebody, sign it on their phone, via attestation, et cetera. And that's one time within the network. So that information we store and we're now really working on how do we interoperate that consent status as a source of truth, so that it can be revoked interoperably as we get more and more advanced, which is exciting. The other big part of kind of where we're going as a platform is really, referrals, I think, is a very limiting view of what we do. Just like a resource directory is a limiting view, it's really a feature of one piece of our platform. We really think of ourselves as an end-to-end solution. And so we have multiple products of payments, analytics, as well as even operational services within our network to allow referral traffic to move more expediently and within a certain level of service. So that's definitely directionally where we're heading, is more and more of a platform and operating system with multiple products, as well as more advanced interoperability solutions. So I'll pause there. I guess that was kind of the elevator pitch, but I'm happy to dive in. I'm sure my team will also be really good at sort of getting into the nitty gritty of some of those things.
Thank you. That's great. It definitely broadens out my understanding of kind of where you're kind of from and where you're headed, which is important. And so thank you for that. I have a few questions, and I want to make sure that we're focusing again our time effectively. But one very quick question though, you said structured data. Are you dealing with unstructured data at all?
Yes, I mean we have both, right? There are certain areas where a free text note can be captured, and of course, as we get to more of an interoperable state with things like EHRs or student information systems or HMISs, there's certain limitations on what discrete data can be exchanged in the initial inception based on kind of where the standard's at and where that system's capabilities are, what the workflow is. So that's all part of it. But our intention is to get increasingly discrete over time, and within our native platform, it is very, very discrete. There's sort of the free text and unstructured fields are pretty limited at this point.
Great. yeah, I just think about, healthcare records or, sort of case management records where so much of the information is in the unstructured part of the narrative, whether it's a CDA or a case review or whatever it might be. So I know that's a critical part of the on the social side of things in particular. So that's something I guess you'd say that you're working towards that. You have some functionality in that area, free text area.
Well, I guess when you say working towards, I mean, I think discrete data is a core part of our offering within our native. We have a lot of native users of our products. I think as we get to more, data exchange between two systems, two workflows, there's always sort of questions about that. That's why we're big proponents in Gravity and really moving the industry forward, investing heavily in FHIR, investing in terminology. So the intent, we're already pretty structured. The intent is to continue to get more structured, and then also allow without turning CBOs into a coding organization. That's not our goal. But we want to be able to get to a place where we're able to actually interoperate more fully the discrete data that we have with systems. So it's a march, I think, in both directions, because as you probably know, social care coordination workflow, right, as a part of healthcare providers workflow or a school counselor's workflow, they may be something that they've been doing for a long time in some way, shape, or form, but at the level where it's scaled, built into the platform, that's still a big step for a lot of technologies and things like that. So we're really trying to lead the way on that and encourage both first the workflow and then next a high level of discrete data exchange between the two. So there's not really an end on that, because we think the workflow is just going to keep getting more advanced.
What types of data standards do you support, like either in healthcare and out, and what kind of consent standards do you support or do you use?
Sure. I can talk about what we're focused on right now, and then maybe Carlos or Cody can jump in on the consent part. So the generally as a company, we have a guiding, when it comes to interoperability, my team standards are a guiding principle. And I think generally that we're big supporters of standards-based exchange, and we're investing in new ones that are more nascent. And we're also really trying to help the industry understand the different use cases for standards and where things apply. I think there's a lot of confusion on these things. So when it comes to like more of a care coordination referral use case, we support a number of different more modern standards. Of course, we have our own APIs, but we do a lot. We do essentially support multiple options depending on what the system's capable of. So the simplest would be, some sort of standardized authentication like SAML or SCIM to essentially provision user accounts and things, and then some light data exchange, more on the like a flat file or CSV. That's common. Sometimes that's all the system's able to do. We're doing that actually with a school system in Kentucky with all the state reported fields. Pretty awesome workflow. And in doing that, we're storing student identifiers and other items to help identify and improve matching over time. We sort of the next iteration of that would be Smart on FHIR. I think that's our most prevalent integration with a system of record for like a care team use case again. And so we have actually seen great adoption, not just on the healthcare side, but also on other platforms beyond healthcare, of sort of moving to Smart on FHIR. And then a third option of more and more bidirectional and advanced data flows, leveraging FHIR as the general standard of exchange. So we're investing heavily in that. We do see utility in other standards as well. I think the use cases are still less defined, but certainly something we'd be open to as those things become more prevalent. On the resource directory side, we have our own taxonomy that's simple for end users, but we also map to AIR's taxonomy. And we've done several integrations with 211s across the country based on the emerging open referral standard. And so not everybody uses that. That tends to be more sort of isolated in the 211 space. So in that context, that tends to be where we focused, although there's still definitely a need for adoption and more universality and in terms of what standards we're talking about when we're talking about purely that phone book resource data. And then on the payment side, also looking at some of our own proprietary integrations, as well as X12 and traditional X12 integrations with Medicaid, state systems, and then generally whatever comes at us. So hopefully that was enough. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Carlos, do you want to jump in on the consent part?
Yeah, I'm not familiar, Jake, with specific standards relating to consent, but I'm happy to talk through kind of how we approach consent and think about it in the context of our referral platform.
That'd be great. Let me just ask one question, Jake. Relative to education, we've bumped into the Common Education Data Standards and EdFine, a number of other standards-based educational, the various educational technology companies. Each of them have sort of kind of like a mixed bag of different different standards they're using. Are you adapting any? You mentioned with Kentucky school identifiers, but are you using any of those standards? Are you using SEDS or EdFi or anything like that? Or
not SEDS. As I mentioned, that's a little less of a standards-based integration other than the authentication part. Because that's really just not relevant in the sort of care team use case of doing a social coordination referral. So generally those users, they're essentially, they call them, I forget what the acronym stands for, FRYSC. They call them Friskies, which is kind of a funny name, but they're essentially counselors that work with students that prescribe wraparound services to the community. For anything that the school can't provide. And so they work with families, they work with students. And so they can authenticate into Unite Us using the common authentication via SAML across their student information system into ours. And then on the back end, we're feeding data in nightly into their student database. And we've had to map all the state required fields, but I've looked at SEDS and just in general, like student information systems are very, very hard to interoperate with notoriously. And most of the energy has been really focused on learning apps. There really isn't a strong use case for this kind of thing, which is actually pretty consistent with what some other companies have told us as well, or other integration partners have told us as well. So we're still on the cusp of that. I do think from like an educational point of view, meaning industry education, not education sector, where we can identify areas of overlap between things like SEDS or HUD required fields like the universal data elements, and start to bring those things together into more of a common understanding of standards and not just a healthcare bias, I think would be a very, very strong point of view and something we feel strongly about. So we'd be happy to, contribute to that idea because, I think we're still really bounded by the healthcare lexicon. I think we see a lot of promise in FHIR, but I think to really get to a level of interoperability we want to see, we need to be collaborating across agencies a little further.
Now let's dive. That's a whole. Each one of these things is its own universe, and we certainly don't have time to dive into that. We do think that, especially on education, early education, home visiting, pre-K, K through 12, P20, all of that whole educational sort of universe is fraught with challenges of sharing information, even amongst themselves. So I think that's on the development map. Carlos, you want to talk a little bit about the how you view consent, and I think Chris's point early on was So, yeah, this is a tough topic, and how do you do this both within the, your customer base, and then at some point I want to make sure we talk a little bit about like what's on the other side of that wall, right? What's on the other side of folks who are not Unitas customers, or who may be involved with services that are not part of the ecosystem, so to speak. But talk a little bit about the consent work, that would be great.
And sorry, just to make sure I understand, when you say talking about customers, clients who are potentially on the other side of the wall or not United customers, what do you? I just want to make sure I understand what the prompt is.
Yeah, so I guess that's I'm thinking about education clients, probation clients. I'm thinking about public health. I'm thinking about other community-based organizations that are not subscribers. People have not subscribed. I think your state level model where everything is going to be funneled through or with you, that's a different story than a community-based one, I think, perhaps, or a county-based one. So that's what I'm talking about. Is everything included in, are you sort of ubiquitous in the sense of wherever data is coming from, your vision is to be able to incorporate that and sort of do the care coordination piece.
No, yeah. Okay, got it. Understood. Appreciate that clarification. And I will say, just taking a little bit of a step back, as Jake and Cody and I have engaged in these conversations, particularly in the interoperability space, one of the things that I've sort of done for myself with it, which I think is helpful, is sort of separating out the kind of technology questions and sort of how do we enable the policy goals here versus the legal and regulatory questions, right? Which is, what is permissible under, a particular law or regulation, as being a separate question, in part because I think when you conflate those two things, right, it makes answering either of those questions harder, right? We have strong views about, I think, how do we create the technology that will enable the kind of an interoperable exchange of information so that we can enable the kind of information sharing that's necessary to connect people with care, right? That's one piece of it. Separately, of course, we also have, and I'm happy to talk to this, but I think it's separate, right? A view of, sort of what the regulators are doing as it relates to some of these legal and regulatory questions. But again, to my mind, those are two pretty separate topics. So I'll try to stick in that first category in terms of kind of technology and process and how we think about it from that perspective. But happy to share our perspective on the other things too. It's just, again, I just wanted to call that out. So, the way that we think about consent is, as it relates to, maybe a little bit of what you were getting at here, which is, Unitas is a technology platform that enables the information sharing that allows people to get connected with social care. And, because of that, we recognize there's this need to collect consent from people to have their information shared on our platform. So Unitas consent is a short one-time consent form that each client or person seeking services must agree to before referrals can be sent on their behalf via the Unitas platform. To be clear, that consent does not replace subject matter specific consents, right? That is, so if a Part 2 organization is on the platform, they will have to, just as they would in any other context, collect their own consent. And part of our perspective here around consent is really to make sure that our consent is equity driven, right? It doesn't mean a lot if the individual who has to agree to this does not understand what they're agreeing to or doesn't have the ability to effectively engage with the information. So our consent is available in 6 different ways, including via email, via text message. You can upload a signed paper copy. You can upload audio files. There's a number of different ways so that anybody, regardless of their abilities, can engage with that consent. And it's available in, I'm not even going to quote you how many languages. It's available in a very large number of languages already, meaning that it is available in our technology for our customers already. And then any other language that we need to translate that into is available on demand. That's just something that we make available. Again, because we believe that, from a health equity perspective, individuals need to be able to engage with, understand, digest that consent for it to be effective.
So I've got a question about the consent process as far as, when people are going through and you're presenting them with information regarding the consent, what does that actually look like? Are you using like a layered consent? Are you doing anything, I'm just wondering, what that process looks like.
Yeah, so I mean, this is all happening in the context of that relationship between the either our customer, right, the health provider, say, for example, and their client or patient, or say a CBO. If maybe that's the first time the person is engaging with the platform, that would be the context in which this comes up. It is part of the workflow organically, so that user will be prompted to collect that consent. They will have the variety of options. I can go through all 6 of them. I think I might have skipped 1 or 2, but they would be prompted to select one of those options. So, for example, say you did it via text message, right? What you would do is, as you're filling it out the information about the individual in the platform, you would be forced to go through this consent step. That is something that has to happen before any referrals can be made on the platform. And you would be prompted to say, okay, which of these 6 options do you select? You select web link sent via text message. You then put the individual's phone number in there. It sends them a text message with a link. They click on that link, and in that, that they were brought to a web page that will have display the consent, and then the individual can engage with that consent right there, can sign it, accept the consent, and then that will be collected and stored in the platform with their case file.
I guess my question was actually more to, considering informed consent, how are you making sure that the information being displayed to them is in a way that's understandable, right? That the consent is, layered consent is one tool that is often used in those situations, because consents can be pretty long and sometimes written in not plain language, which is something I always advocate for in consents, but we often are presented with consent forms that, even as an attorney, I won't read them because they're ridiculous. And so, I just wonder, did you go through a process there to ensure that the consent was understandable? I commend you for having it translated to many, many languages. That's great. But even a translation to another language isn't necessarily going to guarantee understanding if the content itself is not written in plain language.
Yeah, so it is very much written in plain language. I don't want to quote, our head of compliance can quote you like the grade level that it is written to, but it is written with an eye towards accessibility and health equity. So it is very much written in plain language. There is no legalese in there. It does connect to our privacy policy, which is then publicly available for folks who are interested in getting into the legalese, but it is written in a way so that the vast majority of people can understand it. And again, we train our users to be able to understand the consent and give them a lot of information about the consent as well, so that in that hopefully very rare instance where someone is struggling with it, understanding, that they can help them work through understanding the consent.
And so this is a consent, you said this is a general consent, and then any additional consent that's required, such as like the 42 CFR SUD data, that's going to be handled by the user, right? that you're not involved in that consent, except maybe it's noted somewhere on the platform.
Yeah, we have special workflows for those types of organizations. We have a, I don't get too deep in the weeds on this piece, but we have a sensitive organizations feature, and we have certain notifications to make sure that it's clear that when people are dealing with sensitive information, that there are specific requirements about redisclosure, and that and through those through the process of onboarding those organizations, we help them work through those particular requirements, and then they can what they can do is they can upload those consents into the platform, and the consents will be restricted in terms of viewing permissions in the same way that the referral itself would be.
And as far as the information that's actually being housed within the system, is it mostly related to, personal information, perhaps diagnosis and things like that? Or does it dive into more detailed information like treatment information? And
yeah, so Jake and Cody may be better to answer this question, but I'll start, which is to say, we really encourage people to limit the information in the platform to that information that is necessary to connect individuals with care. And all that is required to put someone's information in the platform and make a referral is name and date of birth, I believe. Is that right?
Well, that's how we do capture a lot more than that. But in order for us to inform the matching, like the minimum we need is name, date of birth, and gender. Is generally what we look at to inform the matching. And generally, we're not really exchanging clinical information by any means. We're really focused on sort of that social care lane at this point. So to Carlos's point, that's generally a guideline we have. Now, if they enter it into an unstructured field or something like that, that would be the kind of case where they could potentially do that. But we're not receiving any clinical like diagnoses or things like that at this juncture. Could we see possibilities of that in the future? Sure. But as we get more advanced in what the use cases are and vice versa, but at this point, we're not.
Yeah, and again, in those instances, particularly when we're dealing with sensitive organizations, there are reminders in the platform about those, about limiting that kind of information in those free-form areas, for example.
okay, and I actually am wondering about the patient matching, and this isn't quite, as related to the consent issue, but with just name, birth date, and gender, that seems like pretty minimal information, and that might come up with a lot of matches. Is that a challenge if that's in some cases all that you're receiving, or is it that very rare, I would assume?
Yeah, that's pretty rare. And also, I mean, we've got some pretty sophisticated EMPI capabilities on our side to assist with that. So generally, we're oftentimes too creating new instances of the individual in our database because many organizations are still new. And then we do store the linkage to that source information, source system. So, if I get referred from Duke University Health in North Carolina to Unitas, and then later this patient shows up at UNC down the street, we'll have the linkage that this person with Duke's EHR, and then over time the UNC EHR as well. So once we've informed the match, we maintain that linkage over time.
Okay, yeah, because I just know that in the work that I've done with health departments, the patient matching is often a struggle. It seems health departments often get very limited information about individuals, and you could have the name, birth date, gender, and get 150 potential matches, and making those linkages can be hard.
So Jennifer, I know that that's a huge, everybody we've spoken with is like sort of authentication, identity management, huge, big part of, got to do that first before you can actually do what we're talking about. So, I think it's an important question, but I want to redirect a little bit back to where you were going, if I could. And if people have questions, like raise your hand. So I want to make sure we don't lose it, but I want to be mindful of the time. I want to parse this just a little bit. I fully understand it. So, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the consent is for referral of information, a referral to other organizations, right? I'm a little confused as to whether or not it's actually case coordination using PHI or PII information. So that if, a person is engaged with, let's say a shelter, a feeding program, maybe be getting, housing subsidies, it's on Medicaid. There's a lot of case management information in that, and a lot of PII information and their PHI information as well. Is that where you are operating now? Are you actually acting as the case coordinator because you have access to that information, or are you enabling the referral out to those organizations to get those services? Do you understand the difference there?
Yeah, we're enabling the referral, right? We are, creating the networks of community-based organizations in the geographies as Jake described.
Yep.
We have expectations regarding how those CBOs will operate on the platform, and then we allow providers and other CBOs to make connections to those organizations for the purpose of connecting an individual with care.
And so what Jennifer asked before in terms of 42 CFR or FERPA, that's still the treating organization's responsibility to actually secure that consent to say, I'm willing to share my, substance use disorder information with my healthcare provider or with a probation officer, might that be? That's a separate consent effort that's going on outside of the Unitas platform. Is that correct?
It is a separate consent. I wouldn't necessarily say it's happening outside of the Unitas platform, right? For the most part, we are able to capture those consents in the platform.
You're not actually hosting like a consent form or a process where people go in and consent directly on the platform to those things. Like when you're texting someone a consent, it's not directing them to a 42 CFR consent, correct?
Correct. Okay. We do have the ability to create some specific workflows for organizations to facilitate them collecting the consent, but you're right. We're not like adding on a 42 CFR consent to our consent. We're again relying on that organization to understand those obligations and to manage that part of it. And we're just, again, from a technology perspective, helping to facilitate that.
So there's, Matt, I'm going to get to you in a second. I have a question here. I think we just have a few more minutes left here. So in terms of that care coordination goal, so to think about a person or a family who's involved with both, CBO, for nonprofit, but also entitlement programs or sort of eligibility kinds of programs, that's happening. That's you can facilitate that by making sure the referrals are made to the individual organizations, but the actual care coordination management is happening sort of parallel, or is that actually happening somewhere on your platform? So is there the CDAs and sort of client records and sort of protected information on the platform, or is it that's happening between the clinicians?
So I think are you asking kind of how much information about the individual's needs is being collected in the platform? Is that what you're?
Right. Could a doc, for instance, who is trying to coordinate care for a complicated family, who needs to see different kinds of information, that kind of care coordination requires access to all the private information in order to make clinical decisions, and then also to refer to other services that may be valuable. But that clinical care coordination is I guess I'm understanding it is not necessarily the core function of the platform. Right,
No.
it's more the referral part of it. Okay, great.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah.
Clarification. Thank you.
I think maybe a straightforward way of putting it is, EHR and other systems out there are the system of record for each of these institutions. So that tends to be the primary place of storing data and where sort of that medical record lives, or the student record, as we discussed before. So we're essentially facilitating care between those. So oftentimes part of the workflow implementation is figuring out what those intersection points are to make a more robust care coordination workflow between that agency and anything outside of the services they provide.
Mhm.
That's still the system of record. We're not trying to displace that by any.
Yeah. Okay. Next generation.
And to be honest, there are users of Unitas, in some cases small nonprofits or faith-based organizations or things where they don't have a large technology stack. So in that case, there may be the one of a few, if not the only system they log into on occasion. So in that case, that's essentially all they're using. But in much more larger organizations, that's not the case.
Matt, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, so just correct me if like my understanding of this is incorrect. Like, so you have like essentially code or rules, and these users interacting with these rules, providing consent, showing data, etc. But it sounds like there's not something like this particular set of functionalities is associated with a HIPAA consent versus a FERPA consent, or rules associated with one particular law. Am I right? So it's kind of assumed that the users being onboarded, they're all already at the EHR. So the consent, the HIPAA consent has been collected in the EHR, and now they're being brought onto the Unitas. Is that an accurate characterization, or am I not understanding it?
I mean, I think it probably oversimplifies it a little bit, right? Yes, so using kind of the basic example of a individual who's being referred from a health provider, right? We would expect that any authorizations that are necessary, in addition to the Unitas consent, to share information with Unitas, collected on the front end by that organization, by that health provider. I think where it does get more complicated is when you're talking about 42 CFR or domestic violence organizations, both of which we deal with regularly, and where we will create these specialized workflows. We have additional restrictions in terms of how those referrals can be handled. All of that comes into play. So even though we are not taking on that responsibility for a collect, literally, as I was talking with Jennifer before, collecting that consent, or it's not part of our consent workflow, we do have protections in place to make sure that we are working with those organizations and meeting their needs. Is that helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. I want to be respectful of the time that you guys have given us. And unless there's any other kind of questions, burning in people's pockets at the moment, or if there's other stuff that you guys want to share with us, we haven't had a chance to really look at here. I know that I was on the site looking at the way you describe consent and stuff like that, and I don't know if there's any other white papers or other kind of documentation that would be useful to look at, or is it pretty much on the site?
Yeah, I think let's, Jake, why don't you and I take that back and see if there's anything else. We do have a good amount of information on the site, but I'll see if there's anything else that we can share that might be useful as you're pulling together your report.
That would be super. Yeah, we want to make sure we're just sort of articulating this obviously accurately and clearly. So because there's so much interest in these topics out there for everybody. So thank you so much again for making the time. I know you guys have an incredibly busy schedule, got a lot of things going, and you're doing great work. It's amazing to see what you've done over just a few years, really, to really bring some rationality to the space. It's wonderful, and I certainly is hoping and moving in the right direction with the other federal trends, which I'm hoping will continue there. So thanks again, and look forward to having your involvement. And in fact, we have this work group that's been going for a while now on this, like the last thing what needs is another work group. But in terms of this consent work, there is a group that's been working, and also the larger Unify group is working on a regular basis. If you guys wanted to have someone attend, participate periodically or regularly, that would be great as well. And so it's an open forum. It's not as rigidly structured as an HL7 work group, but so it's available and open. So there's no, we're not trying to hide anything in that group. So, and I can, if you're interested, I'll send you the links to it, and you can join the conversations. They're fascinating conversations, generally, at least from my perspective. So,
and I just wanted to throw in, I was hoping maybe I could follow up via email, perhaps. When I was at HIMSS, I had some conversations with some people at Epic, and they were discussing how they were looking to actually, working on interoperability issues, and they called you guys out specifically when I was having the conversation. And so I don't know, they said that stuff was launching soon. I assume you know what they're talking about, but I'd love to hear more about that as well. So, but thank you for all the information.
Yeah, happy to. And that's really nice of you. Thank you. And yes, just real quick on that, we are launching our a much more advanced integration with Epic. Really, it's probably one of the first demonstrations of the Gravity standard, and really all based in Fire. So they've essentially built the Unitas workflow into Epic, and we're able to send and receive data in a much more richer way, which we're really excited about.
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear more.
Use the consent Fire resource?
That is, well, in the MVP, I think we're still working on that part, but the intent is actually to query Unitas as a source of truth for that, because we have essentially that, between Epic instances, we have that information. So that is definitely part of the implementation over the next several months.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's a great question. The future is upon us, so that's great.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks all.